his entire time here. But he also, in his last 10, 15 years, identified a need in the curriculum. This was the kind of teacher he was, for the development of seminarians in the area of church leadership. And so Dr. Bracke essentially took on a whole new field in the latter part of his career, and read and developed himself as a scholar and teacher in this area, and taught a course in church leadership and administration that was transformative for several generations of Eden graduates. Mary Bracke, John's wife, served for that entire time in several capacities at the seminary, as the director of the seminary bookstore and as our organist and choir director here in the chapel. And so in honor of their legacy of service to Eden, and in honor of John's attention to the need of leadership in the church and the development of leaders, we inaugurated the Bracke Lecture, which is a lecture series focusing on the theme of leadership. And tonight, as we think about leadership, I think in the last week or so, we are all aware that the church's leaders need exactly what tonight's theme offers: the opportunity to come together and be encouraged, to be challenged, to persist in hope. So as we reflect tonight on the subject of democracy, oh Lord, after the 2024 election, we are grateful for our panel here tonight, for our speakers, and for the forethought and planning for this lecture this year to bring us these resources that we need so badly. Eden Theological Seminary, I just want to share a little bit of our mission, because I think for me in the last week, rooting in that has made all the difference. We are coming through with our Board of Trustees a strategic planning process in which we are refining our mission statement. And so I'm just going to float the not yet approved mission statement as it has been evolving through that process, because to me it has become a beacon of hope that is grounding me in this practice of persisting in hope. So let me see if I have it memorized. Eden Theological Seminary is called to strengthen the church by educating leaders with theological imagination. You got that, church? Theological imagination and faithful resilience. Oh, I hear that this week. Digging deep for that and the resources of that. To join God's loving and liberating work in the world. And that is the work that was happening before last Tuesday and endures till now. And we continue to be invited, encouraged, called, summoned to join that work. And so for our speakers tonight who will take up that work with us, we are grateful. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague here, who is responsible for ordering this evening in all of its parts, our professor of community leadership and engagement, and our director of the Walker Leadership Institute, Reverend Dr. Dietra Wise Baker.
Good evening. What a week we've had in the world, yes? But we are persisting in hope. And I am so excited to introduce you tonight to the Bishop, Leah Daughtry. Bishop Daughtry is a nationally acclaimed organizer, activist, political strategist, author, faith leader, and public theologian. The daughter of a long line of community organizers and activists. Bishop represents the 5th consecutive generation of pastors in the Daughtry family. A multifaceted leader with the gift of solving highly complex problems with complexity, with speed and precision, Leah has proven capacity to manage multi-billion-dollar budgets and develop internal and external communication strategies. She is the principal of On These Things LLC, which supports a broad array of businesses and organizations with strategic planning, project management, and community engagement activities, in addition to a stint on Capitol Hill. Bishop Daughtry has previously served as the Chief of Staff at the U.S. Department of Labor, the Chief of Staff of the Democratic Party, as well as the Chief Executive Officer of the 2008 and 2016 Democratic National Conventions, making her the only person in the Democratic Party history to hold that position twice. Currently, Bishop Daughtry serves as the presiding prelate of the House of the Lord's Churches, standing at the intersection of faith and politics. She works with community activists and organizations, political entities, and businesses, faith leaders, and communities to assist them in building coalitions and partnerships that advance the common good. Daughtry is the co-author, along with Donna Brazile, Yolanda Caraway, and Minion Moore, of the NAACP Image Award winning For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Politics. In 2018, Bishop launched Power Rising, a convening of, by, and for Black women, designed to support Black women in leveraging their political, economic, and social power to ensure equity, opportunity, representation for ourselves and our communities. This phenomenally successful gathering created an agenda that is turning power into action and using our influence for the betterment of ourselves, our communities, and our country. In 2023, President Biden appointed Daughtry to serve as the vice chair of the board of directors of the Wilson International Center for Scholars. Bishop Daughtry serves as the equity advisor for Sephora and on the editorial board of Global Women's Forum for Economy and Society. She sits on the board of directors of Wesley Theological Seminary, the National Council of Negro Women, Higher Heights for America, the Katie Geneva Cannon Center for Womanist Leadership. In addition, she is the co-founder and the co-chair of the Black Church PAC, co-chair of the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference, the chairman of the Spiritual Oversight Committee for Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, and an at-large member of the Democratic National Committee, the governing body of the Democratic Party, and she serves as the member of its Rules and Bylaws Committee. Born and raised in the BK, or other known as Brooklyn, New York, Daughtry is a graduate of Dartmouth College and Wesley Theological Seminary, and she is my hero. Will you please welcome the Bishop Leah Daughtry as our 2024 Bracke Lecture. Bishop, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for reading my bio. And as I read it, I think I need more hours in a day. I appreciate the invitation, and to our president, thank you so much for your opening comments and for grounding us. In that way, I'm excited to be with you. So many of my colleagues have journeyed the halls of Eden, and I've heard so much about it. And so I'm glad to now count myself in the number of those who had the Eden experience. So thank you very, very much. As I begin to share with you this evening, I want to say that, as has been said, this has been a very challenging week. And if I might start with a moment of personal transparency, this is probably my first public thing since the election. And quite honestly, I think I just got out of bed yesterday, because that's where I have been since the concession speech, in bed with the covers over my head, trying to reconcile all that has happened in the last week. And so I woke up yesterday and said, oh my goodness, why did I agree to do this lecture this week? This was not a good idea. I was not thinking. But God is in all things, and everything is in divine order. And so here I am. And so as I share with you today, there will be some moments that I speak from more directly from my lived experience in this moment. As we share, I've been asked to offer some reflections on democracy. Democracy. We throw that word around a lot, especially lately. But what exactly do we mean? What does it mean when we say democracy? So I want to start there. What is democracy and why is it even worth defending? So I want to just, and some of you know this, the 8 essential elements of a democracy. First is the idea that the power of the government comes from the people, and citizens exercise their power through voting, ensuring that their voices are heard. The second key element is the rule of law, that laws apply equally to all of the citizens, including its leaders, and this prevents abuse of power and ensures justice. The third essential element is the separation of powers. Who remembers Schoolhouse Rock? I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. We know that language around the separation of power, and our government is divided into branches: legislative, executive, judicial, and each branch has its own powers and responsibilities. The fourth element, essential element in a democracy, is checks and balances, so that no one branch of the government controls any of the others. Without that, we become a dictatorship where an all-powerful executive branch can control and dictate the operations of the others. Then there's the idea of individual rights. A democracy protects the rights and freedoms of individuals, such as freedom of speech, assembly, religion, and in our country, these rights are enshrined in our Constitution. In a democracy, we have majority rule with minority rights. So while the majority's decision is followed, in a democracy, the rights of minority group, of the minority set of voters, are protected. In a democracy, we have free and fair elections. Elections are conducted transparently, allowing us to choose our leaders without coercion or fraud. And finally, a democracy is built on citizen participation. Active participation of the citizenry in politics and civic life is encouraged and necessary for democracy to function effectively. Democracy is fundamental to our way of life here in America. It's about everybody having a say and ensuring that power isn't concentrated in the hands of a few. That's the promise of democracy. It promotes freedom and equality. It acts as a check on power. It fosters social cohesion, but it isn't just a political system. It's a way of ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to contribute to the common good. So as we reflect on these 8 essential elements of a democracy, my reflection is that our democracy today is in peril and hanging by a thread if it has not already failed outright. How we defend it and protect it, however imperfect it is, how we strengthen and advance it to insist that it live up to its promise is the work that is now before us as a nation. But given the results of last Tuesday's election, I believe it will get worse before it gets better, that it will get harder before it is easier, and that we will lose before we win. How we understand this moment will help us prepare ourselves and the people that we are called to serve for the challenges that are surely ahead of us. So let's look at this moment, this whole moment, just exactly what happened. What happened? What happened? Donald John Trump was reelected to the presidency. A convicted criminal, a serial husband, and a serial abuser, a deft liar, multiple failed businesses and bankruptcies, whose campaign was built on appealing to the greed of those of the top, while also appealing to the grievances of those at the bottom. His campaign centered on othering. And no matter your economic situation, these others were the cause or the blame. He said quite clearly what his platform was going to be and what he was going to do in very plain English. And millions of our fellow Americans voted for him anyway. Despite the freedoms we would lose, despite the harm that would be inflicted upon young people and seniors and those with health challenges and those who've fallen on hard times, we knew all of this about him and his platform, and still millions of our fellow Americans voted for him because of or in spite of. Now, there's lots of talk about a landslide and a mandate to govern. But as always, hope lies in the truth. Fact, Donald Trump won 50.3% of the vote. That is barely a majority and far from a landslide. Fact, in 2020, Joe Biden won 81.2 million votes, more than any other candidate in the history of our country. And Trump in 2020 won 74.2 million votes. Fact, in 2024, Trump won 75.1 million votes. 2020, 74 million, 24, 75 million. And Kamala Harris won 71.8 million votes, a difference of 3 million votes between them. Fact, Trump won just about the same number of votes in 2024 as he did in 2020, which means that his support has not grown by much. Though the composition of his voter pool has certainly shifted with gains in his share of the Latino vote, the non-college educated vote, the youth vote, and the vote of those in lower economic brackets. Last fact, over 8 million fewer people voted in 2024 than in 2020. 8 million people who voted in 2020 decided to sit this one out. And it's probably more if you consider new registrants who voted this year. And of course, this does not include the number of Americans who are not registered to vote or who've never voted. This 8 million is without a doubt the margin of difference between the two candidates, and why this 8 million chose to disengage is worthy of reflection and a deep dive study. Now, those are the numbers, but what happened? What do these numbers represent? Let me offer some observations. First, there was a realignment in the ranks of white people. Now, to be clear, Democrats have not won the white vote since LBJ was president. Let me say that again. The Democrats have not won the white vote since the 60s. Anything the Democrats have won at the presidential level has been because of a minority of white folks, along with the majority of Black and Latino voters. What we saw this cycle is that the minority of white folks who vote for Democrats has gotten even smaller. And that, combined with the loss of vote share in the Latino community, particularly among Latino men, was enough to provide the margin of victory. What has happened? The Democrats are learning a not so new lesson about who their voters are and aren't, which should force a reassessment of where their target should be and how their resources should align with those targets. Whether they seriously undertake this assessment and realignment remains to be seen. The Republicans, on the other hand, are glorying in their victories, feeling affirmed that the way they campaigned and the issues they campaigned on were right. It remains to be seen if they will fulfill their campaign promises and if their campaign style of division and demonization will continue. What happened? An entrenched apathy in the nation that leads people to think that their vote doesn't matter. And that is underscored by the way we make it harder for people to vote. If we really wanted people to vote, if we were really interested in participation, we'd have election day on weekends, not on a Tuesday. Or we'd have same-day voter registration across the country like we do in Illinois and Maryland and Michigan and a few other states. Or we'd undergird our commitment to the principle of everyone voting with a system of 100% vote by mail, where every eligible voter automatically gets a ballot in the mail. You don't have to request it. You don't have to show up for it. It arrives at your home. Many states did this during 2020 because of COVID. And I believe that at least some of the 2024 drop-off is due to folks not having this automatic option. It's easy to vote when it shows up in your mailbox and you just cast your vote and put it in the mailbox. We're back to people having to make a decision and a schedule and a plan for voting. And for many folks, especially those who don't have the economic choices of going in later or coming back early or childcare, it becomes a challenge to cast the ballot. What has happened? Disdain and intolerance for truth, and a preference for the easy answer, and convincing ourselves that the lie that sounds good and feels good really is truth. We've so individualized our pain and our success that we've lost sense of community. As long as me and my family are okay, it's okay. You deal with your situation and I'll deal with mine. We no longer care about what's best for the community. We focus on what's best for me, myself, and I. And that's how we get immigrants voting to deport immigrants, because they don't think that they themselves will be deported. That's how we get people voting to enshrine reproductive freedoms in their state, but also voting for the party that was willing to take them away from the women in the neighboring state. None of those who voted for Trump's economic plan think they themselves or their parents will lose their Social Security or their Medicare. We're okay with tariffs. Yes, let's tax those foreign-made goods, until that TV we saw at Best Buy for $150 now is $500. We're okay with millions of children not having access to Head Start. Doesn't matter, I don't have children. Or that public school children will be automatically enlisted in the armed forces. Who cares? My children go to private school. Or that Obamacare will be eliminated. I have insurance through my job. It is impossible to deport 11 million people from our country, logistically, practically, and economically, but too many are okay with that. Until, as Ana Navarro said on The View yesterday, some folks are going to have to figure out how to take care of their own children once the nanny is deported. Or until tomatoes are $5 because we've deported an entire workforce. We're okay with the idea of children being separated from parents and children in cages. At least they weren't aborted. The pain and the anger is what happened in our nation. This pain and anger that exists from those who are trying to make sense of their circumstances, why they can't seem to get ahead, why their children are failing out of school, why the streets aren't safe, why they can't afford health care, why their drinking water is brown, and why asthma is so prevalent in their communities, why their son or daughter got a 25-year sentence when their partner in crime, the white child over the tracks, got 3 months probation. And finding no satisfying answers, they decide that it's their fault. Those people, those woke people, those defund the police people, those union people, those immigrants, those women, those gay folks, because it's easier to blame a person or a people than it is to blame a faceless corporation. It's easier to blame immigrants. It's easier to blame the poor rather than blame the government that won't raise minimum wage. It's easier to blame the defund the police people than it is to blame an unjust criminal justice system. It's easier to blame the other. And those who aren't feeling the sharp end of the economic stick refuse to see and hear those who do. They gloss over the pain. They discount it by not addressing it, or worse, by telling us that it's not that bad. What's happening, finally? Racism and sexism. We've come through an election cycle with a woman candidate, our second woman candidate in less than 20 years. Clearly more qualified, having worked in every branch of government, and yet defeated by a man who can't keep a business running. I will tell you, family, that I woke up wounded. I woke up wondering about this country I live in. I woke up listening to men say they won't vote for a woman. And I know I shouldn't be surprised. After all, it happens in our churches. We won't let women lead. So why should I be surprised that it's happening in other parts of the country? I woke up wounded because this nation tells us that you just need to go to school, work hard, prove yourself, be qualified, and you can be anything. And I just want to ask the nation, tell me what I have to do. Tell me what I have to do, because I've done all those things. She did all those things. What do we have to do to be seen as equal, as qualified, as worthy? It's a painful, emotional thing to fall out of love with your country and to feel that your country does not value you or want you. You can imagine it. You can wonder about it. But an election such as the one we went through here and the one we went through in 2016 says to you all over again that your country doesn't love you, that your country doesn't value you. And so what shall we do with that? How do we move forward? How do we live our lives in a country that does not love us? How do we move forward? How do we get out of bed? How do we keep going to school and keep doing the work and keep showing up? Let me offer some thoughts about what all this means and about the way forward using a theological or faith lens. Whether we choose to acknowledge it or not, the battle that we face now is not simply blue versus red. It's not one candidate versus another, or one race versus another, or one party versus another. Rather, it is an illuminated, really, I believe, undergirded by a battle about what God we believe in. Do we believe in a God of scarcity or a God of sufficiency? Scarcity versus sufficiency. Those who believe in the God of scarcity, whether they call him God or not, believe that there simply isn't enough to go around, that there isn't enough for everyone, and that God makes choices about who gets provision and who will not, who gets favor and who doesn't, who's included and who is not, who can come in and who cannot, who is worthy and who is not. After all, there is not enough for everyone. This God does not provide, or rather, this God only provides for some, certain people. And we, like that God, then choose favorites and we parcel out love, justice, mercy, and rights based on whom we deem worthy. This is the God and the theology of scarcity. And on the other hand, there is the theology of sufficiency, where God's provision is available to everyone, where there is always enough, more than enough for everyone to partake, where we are all loved and all worthy, and where we all have value, where we are all made in the image of the divine, where love, justice, mercy, and rights are for everyone, and that God is enough and has enough and provides enough for all of us. That's the battle we're in this country. Scarcity versus sufficiency. The theology with which we align determines how we see, treat, and love our neighbors, whether we make room for them, for their difference, for their pain, for their hurt, for their joys, for their sorrow, for their hopes and their aspirations, even if those hopes and aspirations, even if those joys and sorrows, even if they're different, even if they're pain, even if they are different from our own. I'm going to give you 4 things for how we move forward in this time. Number 1, tell the truth. Stand for truth. There comes a time when we have to take a stand for what is right, even if it is not expedient, even when it is not comfortable, even when it is not to our advantage. We might be tired, it might be different, ridiculous. We have to stand. We must be committed to truth, to living it, to telling it, to standing by it. Our leadership requires it. Because when we refuse to tell the truth, then we normalize what is not normal. As Sister Iyanla would say, we have to call a thing a thing. It doesn't matter who's saying it. Stupid is stupid, and ignorant is ignorant, and foolishness is foolishness. It doesn't matter who's speaking. Lies are lies. We have to bear public witness. It is wrong to demonize migrants and their families, and we should say so. It is wrong to advantage the rich at the expense of the poor, and we should say so. It is wrong to act like racism doesn't exist and demolish DEI and affirmative action programs, and we should say so. It is wrong to blame guns for school shootings, and we should say so. It is wrong to blame the poor and the hurting for their circumstance wrought by decades of institutional classism and racism and sexism, and we should say so. We have to tell the truth. Number 2, we got to show up. Gil Scott-Heron would want me to tell you that the revolution will not be televised. And though it is important that we understand and are conversing in social media, this struggle we are in will require more than keyboard warriors. It will require us to get our hands dirty in the hand-to-hand combat of relationship building, community organizing, and personal engagement. This requires us to make room, all of us, to make room for those we don't agree with. This is a hard thing as we grapple with friends and neighbors and church members who voted the other way. And I'm not asking you to agree with them. I'm asking you to see them. You got to show up. Number 3, get in the way. The late Congressman John Lewis tells the story of when he was a young man and he was getting ready to go join Dr. King in the movement after weeks of pestering his family. They finally relented and gave him permission to meet up with Dr. King. And as Lewis's father was putting him on the bus, he said, "Well, John, as long as you're going, remember to get in the way." In this environment, we all need to learn how to get in the way. We need to learn to get in the way of going along to get along. We need to get in the way of meeting for the sole purposes of the photo op. We need to get in the way of policy that keeps the poor poor and the rich rich. We need to get in the way of healthcare policy that only works if you have money. We need to get in the way of silence that ties our tongues in the face of injustice. We should be leading in any conversation, in any action that is about justice, fairness, and equity. Moving forward requires us as people of faith to reclaim our faith loudly, boldly from those who've given our faith a bad name. We cannot be content to shake our heads and tisk-tisk at errant social posts or political views that hinge on faulty or half-baked or just plain wrong biblical interpretation. We have to call it out in word and in action. We have to get in the way. And the last and the 4th thing, we have to have hope. In spite of our pain, in spite of our challenges, we have to have hope. We stand at a dire precipice in our nation, at a crossroads of crises few of us would have been able to imagine. And there will be, as Dr. King said, some difficult days ahead. But we've had difficult days before, and we've survived them, and we've thrived through them. We've lived through slavery. We've lived through the Great Crossing. We lived through Reconstruction and Jim Crow and internment camps. And we answered with the abolitionist movement and the suffrage movement, the civil rights movement, Stonewall, the women's movement, the farm workers movement, Black Lives Matter, and so many more. And we've been strengthened by the great cloud of witnesses who didn't receive the promises, but saw them in the future and didn't stop believing just because their dreams didn't come to pass in their lifetime. They didn't stop fighting for freedom, for education, for the right to vote, the right to live, the right to be equal and live freely, even though they wouldn't see it in their lifetimes. So now in this moment, as we fight for freedom and self-determination, as we fight for the principles of democracy, as we battle for our people, let us hold on to hope. Let us remember to hope. Let us model hope. Let us remind ourselves that there is still hope, and hope is a form of resistance. Our ancestors bequeathed it to us, bequeathed us a hope that endures in the face of seemingly insurmountable circumstance. And our hope is believing despite the odds. Our hope flaunts probability and exists regardless of possibility or impossibility, and it gives us the strength to fight. Because if we want this democracy, we're gonna have to fight for it. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you, Bishop Daughtry, for sharing your vulnerability, for telling the truth, and for bringing the word, the trifecta of forces that animate and galvanize our communities, our collaborations, and our transformative work in the world. We are grateful for your word. I am Julie Jennings. I serve Eden as the Associate Dean for Enrollment and Student Support, and it is my privilege to introduce our respondents tonight. With us to join our conversation are Rabbi Andrea Goldstein, who has been a rabbi at Congregation Sher Emeth since 1998. She received her undergraduate degree in communications from Northwestern University and was ordained in 1998 at the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati, Ohio. Rabbi Goldstein has made the call for justice and equality, along with the search for spiritual connection, focal points of her rabbinate. In recent years, Rabbi Goldstein has served on the editorial board of the Central Conference of American Rabbis Reformed Jewish Quarterly as the chair of the Robert P. Jacobs Jewish Fund for Human Needs. And she participated in an 18-month rabbinic training program sponsored by the Institute for Jewish Spirituality. She is married to Brett Goldstein, who is also here tonight, and is the proud mother of Macy, Eli, and Lila. Welcome, Rabbi Andrea. And Rabbi David Gerth is lead organizer. Reverend David Gerth. We issue all kinds of honorary degrees here. Reverend David Gerth is lead organizer for integrated voter engagement of the Gamaliel Network. He previously served as executive director of Metropolitan Congregations United in St. Louis for 12 years. He is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. He has organized as a layperson and clergy leader before becoming a full-time organizer and is part of the Gamaliel Network Senior Training Team. Under his leadership, MCU designed sacred conversations on race and action as a way of engaging congregations to address structural racism in St. Louis after the Ferguson uprising. He is a founding board member of the Missouri Organizing and Voter Engagement Collaborative, also known as MOVE, and is part of the Gamaliel State Strategy Table. He earned his BA at Earlham College and MDiv right here at Eden Theological Seminary. So, Rabbi Andrea, Reverend David, we welcome you. And let me invite you into the conversation by asking you to share your brief initial reflections on Bishop Daughtry's remarks and the 2024 election.
I want to start with something that you pushed me to think about. I wasn't thinking about for tonight. My father grew up in Germany during World War II, and then in what was Soviet-occupied East Germany, which is a very difficult place to live because the Soviets were very happy to be able to punish the Germans for what they had done. And many Germans were turning on each other. It was a very dangerous place to live. But I grew up with my father in O'Fallon, Illinois. And at the same time that his grandmother was still on the other side of the wall. So while I was a child, I thought there was no way that the Germanys would be reunited and that that side of my family would ever be able to really see each other. And yet the wall is gone. And we thought that that sort of thing would never happen again. My father did two regular acts of civic responsibility. He was pastor. He graduated from here 61 years ago. But he always gave blood. Every time his body would allow him to go give blood, he would go give blood again. So he had, I don't know how many gallons of blood. I've tried. I can't get a pint out of me for anything. I will pass out or it'll work. It doesn't work. But I promise you, I will never miss an opportunity to vote for a president or a senator or the judge or a ballot initiative. I will always be at the ballot because I grew up knowing what a gift that was to be able to vote and what happens when we lose our democracy. So you've just really prompted me, Bishop, to that took me into my gut. So thank you. 6 weeks ago, I was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin in a deep blue turf and then in some hardcore purple turf, knocking on doors, talking to people about why we should close one of the worst prisons in the state and direct the money that would be spent on building a new prison into investment in the community. I laid this out to a guy at a door and he looked at me and he said, "You're an idiot." And I thought to myself, well, at least it's a white guy talking to a white guy. So we were in Milwaukee because we were on both sides of the street that divides the community, North Avenue. And we hit both ends of the streets, like both sides of the Delmar Divide here in St. Louis. We knew that that's where the work needed to be before the election, and that hasn't changed in my perception at all. Last weekend, I was in Pittsburgh knocking on doors, talking about local issues of the intersection between environmental racism and a community in Pittsburgh that sends more Black men into the county jail where they die before they're ever even in trial, just like here in St. Louis. And then this election happens. We really felt like we were in the right places doing all of the right things. And it seems not to have made a difference. So what did I do yesterday? After trying to round up all our voter engagement numbers from all over the country, 12 states where we organize, I got up on the back of my house where there's a leak in the roof, on a roof that's just a little higher than I should have been on, but a little too low for me to allow anybody else to do the work. I had to do it myself. And I thought, this is where we are. I'm not going to fix the whole roof, but, and I'm in the chapel, I got to watch my language. I'm starting to talk I'm ready to start talking like an organizer, not like the pastor. There's not going to be a leak on the back of my house. So I got to figure out what's going on in my neighborhood. I may not be able to change the whole thing right now, but if any of us are going to believe that there's a reason to work for this democracy, not just to believe in this democracy, to work for it, we're going to have to see results. The jail in St. Louis, the jail in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the jail in downtown Milwaukee, the same issues in all of our places. I'll just, let's get to the real rabbi in a second here, right? What you said about, this is clearly an election about race and gender and economic equity. And at the center of everything that we're up against is America's history of white supremacy. We can't avoid it, and we need to dig deep into it, but we need to dig into the intersection of all of those issues. And we've got to find reasons to believe. For me, it was just like, stick some tar paper on the back of the house until we get this thing fixed right. I gotta believe that I can do that much. Last thing, Sunday at church, we had Bible study. I don't remember exactly what we're reading, but the message of the story that we were reading was just that God is going to be there and everything's going to be all right. And I thought to myself, when I was 20, I would have ripped this thing to shreds because there's no evidence that God is on duty in St. Louis, the United States this week. And I thought to myself, nope, I am not going to tear it to shreds. I'm going to grab on and hang on for dear life. I got to hang on to all of the hope that I can get wherever I can find it. And so, God forbid, good church, good Sunday school. We had a congregational meeting after church. And we said, why are we here and where are we going? And instead of coming up with a bunch of cheap little answers, people gave their testimonies about why they joined St. John's. It was spontaneous. And everybody who spoke said something that was on my heart. I believe that this is one of these times when we do need to be able to respond. We do need to be able to be strategic, but we got to get the spiritual oxygen mask on ourselves. And I got it at a congregational meeting after church. Christian Blackman said, the first day I came to St. John's was Palm Sunday. And that Sunday, we had a palm parade it was part of worship, but we left the building and we went to the payday lenders down the street. We were going to turn over the tables of the money changers as part of Sunday worship. I don't know what it is for your congregation, but find a way to be a testimony on the thing that is down the street from you. And we will build the country that we need, not the country that we have had.
Bishop, they asked me to be brief, and if I was really going to honor that, I would just simply say ditto to everything you said, and we could move on from there. I'm so thankful to have been here and to have heard your testimony and been inspired by you. So thank you so much. That was a gift to me. I want to share, based on the title of the lecture, that in my faith tradition, each week we are reading from a portion of our Torah from the 5 books of Moses. And this week, I just want to lift up what has been speaking to me in the wake of the election. So our Torah portion this week actually is packed. It's really packed with a lot of stories. Sometimes as a preacher, you're like, why'd you pack so much in this one? Like, why don't you spread it out through Leviticus a little bit more? But anyway, that's fine. So this week in the portion, Abraham, in my opinion, shamefully listens to his wife, Sarah, and exiles Hagar and Ishmael from his home. And what the Torah tells us is that after the water and food that he provided for them is gone, Hagar understandably despairs and is certain that she knows their fate, which is that they are going to perish. And she is so certain of this fact that she places her child under a bush and walks away from him because she cannot bear to see or hear him suffer and die, right? That's what she knows in her bones is going to happen. And the text says that she cries and wails. And then the text says that an angel of God comes and speaks to her and says, I have heard the cries of the child, which she could not hear because she was too far away. But God heard. And God says, you don't have to lose yourself. I'm paraphrasing God. I'm sorry. You don't have to lose yourself in despair. I don't want you to lose yourself in despair. And then it says that God opens Hagar's eyes and she sees a well. It doesn't say God made a well to help her. Yeah. The text says God opens Hagar's eyes to what was there all along.
All right, Rabbi.
And I'll add what's not in our Torah text, but what our tradition adds in the form of a midrash is that before God created the world, before the creation of the world in Genesis, our tradition says that God created 10 items to help sustain the world before the world was even created at all. And one of them was that well. That I want to say to all of us that, well, also just going back to the text, right? Like, obviously she sees the well, she gets the child, they get nourishment from the well. The text doesn't say that her despair disappeared or that there was a happily ever after right the next moment, right? She had to go on into an uncertain future. But what I want to say, Bishop, when you say to tell the truth, I want to say, like, to tell the whole truth. There is pain, there is anger, there is despair, but that is not all that there is. And if that's the only story we tell, we're not telling God's story. We're not acknowledging that there is still nourishment to be had. And what I want to say from me, from just my very personal place, is that my nourishment for me is going to come from, Bishop, what you also shared, which is showing up for one another. I believe that the culture of greed and selfishness that you spoke to is a weapon in this administration's arsenal, and they will bludgeon us with it if we let them. They will exhaust us with it if we let them, and we will be exhausted. But what we cannot do is turn on each other. So I'm sorry, going a little long, but I'm just going to I'll come to the end, which is to say, in 2016, in the morning after the election, I could not get out of bed. It was horrible. And this year, last week, I didn't want to get out of bed, but a text came to me, and it's not from scripture, but it is part of my people's prayer book. And it's a paraphrasing of a quote from Michael Walzer, Professor Michael Walzer. who talks a lot about liberation theology. And I'm going to paraphrase the paraphrase, but what it basically says is wherever we go, wherever we are, it is Egypt. And for our people, for the Jewish people, Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim. That's how you say Egypt, but Mitzrayim means from the narrow place, from the place where you feel you have no options, where you can't see anything, right? Right. So every place we are Egypt, and there is a better place, and there is a promised land. And the only way to get from Egypt, from the narrow place to the promised land, is by going first through the wilderness. And second, when we go through the wilderness, we must go through by joining hands and marching together. That is what I believe is going to be our well. And we have to remind ourselves of it again and again and again and again, because what current power wants to do is divide us. And we can't let it happen. Because we are not alone. We are not alone. That's my well and my hope. So.
So people of faith, I want to trouble the waters. Thank you for that, Rabbi. Y'all are blessing us. I want to trouble the waters, Bishop, and bring you back into the conversation, because you talked about what I would name theological sickness in the form of scarcity and sufficiency. I would say that sickness of individualism. As my pastor said on Sunday, what are we going to do? He was talking in the context of the Black church. What we're going to do with that Billy Graham theology that we grew up on? Because it's clear now that we got to handle that as a church. So my question for you all is, what do we do with the theological sickness that is present in our communities of faith? What are the spiritual and political practices that can ground us in carefully cutting out that sickness? Because it has to be cut out. Bishop, I want to start with you.
Thank you. I think it has to start with those of us who've come to a consciousness that it is a sickness, who've had the revelation that it is a sickness, being willing to constantly challenge it within ourselves, within our own circles, within our own congregations, and then within our own communities. Part of, I think, the reason it's gotten so far is because we've allowed it to run unchecked. We've let it go and we just say, oh, those are those people, those evangelicals, those Billy Graham people. It's not a problem. It is a problem. We allowed it to become a problem because we didn't stop it when we heard it. Some of us ascribe to it. Some of it is our own church, but it doesn't change if we're not willing to say, okay, I need a new way. And that means for some of us, we got to get smarter. We have to expose ourselves to other things, to other teachings. We got to be willing to hear another way and let our way that we grew up with be challenged. So that means investing in education. It means investing in an actual newspaper. It means investing in a hard Bible. It means investing in a seminary education or a Bible class or something, or bringing in people we're not accustomed to listening to and allowing our way to be challenged. Because if we can't take a challenge and defend the faith, then what is the faith that we have? But nothing changes. Moms Mabley said, y'all know Moms Mabley, old Black woman. If you do what you always did, you get what you always got. So if we keep preaching the same, we're going to keep preaching the same. And we're going to keep getting the same responses from the churches who are stuck. And I want to say that there is a remnant always within the Black church, within the progressive church, that has never believed any of the Billy Graham whatnot, that has never been in league with the Donnie Swaggers and the Jimmy Swaggers of the world. That's why that wasn't even allowed in our church. We grew up with a Black Jesus on the wall in the sanctuary. So this is foreign to me. But still, we challenge ourselves, we get smarter, we get new information, we get new people, we create, and we're intentional about it. About creating a new paradigm, of creating a new shift, creating a community. It doesn't happen by happenstance. We have to be intentional, particularly in wartime. We're in a battle, and the only way we get out of this battle alive is by intentionally deciding what our game plan is going to be, who our partners are going to be, how we're going to go into warfare and come out differently than we went in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was in a session with one of my colleagues who's really, really mad about the election. And we were planning a session, and she said, "I don't want any of the nicey stuff." She said it like an organizer said. I cleaned it up. And we have to talk to people we haven't been talking to. And like, these things are both true, and it will be very, very difficult to do them at the same time. So we have to be as bold as we have been in this conversation about the powers of oppression in this country and the powers that are at work to dismantle anything of whatever democracy we've got. And like in Missouri, you don't win if you don't talk to every community. There's no single part of this state or demographic that is going to win the state. We've got to be talking to people that we don't want to talk to. The second thing I would say is, and not just to talk, not just to be Claire McCaskill. Sorry, Claire McCaskill, but it's not enough to just be middle of the road. We've got to stand for something too. Second thing I would say is that whenever there's a conflict, you got to get the thing on the table. And if we don't put your question on the table at Sunday school with the adults or with the kindergartners or at the church council meeting, then we're not getting there. But we have to put it on the table in a way that we can actually, we are going to address. It's not me as the pastor cramming something down the congregation's throat, or one person on one side of the table with their political view just fighting. There's got to be a real conversation. So for me, the way that what keeps me going about that is that in the creative chaos of the beginning of Genesis, God is in the middle of that. And so we have to trust that if we put the messy stuff on the table faithfully, with longing for a relationship, that the well is there if we open our eyes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think I think that what you've both touched on is we have to start waking up to the fact that we are also, we've either gone along with or been swept up by a society that allows us to stay separate from one another, right? Like, I get my news from where I want to get my news from, and I don't want to hear your news over there. And there's lots of good reasons for that. I mean, I really don't want to hear your news over there, but that means that I'm further away from you who are listening to it, right? And along with talking to one another, I think that we've stopped learning how to listen to one another, and that there was so much anger in this election. And I don't know that this is true, but I have to believe that underneath the anger, there's just a lot of pain. Yeah. And what is my capacity to listen to the pain of someone else? Someone who is advancing policies that hurt me and the people that I care about, and hurt people I don't know at all. I don't, I feel like there's a lot of that and that needs to take place. And also to start that at the very, very local level. Like I can't fix the immigration system, but who can I work with in my community to help take care of the immigrants? And who can I work with, even though I don't agree 100% with everything they might agree with? I feel like that's another, I feel like it's actually an illiberal mindset to say it's a zero-sum game. I will only work with you if you 100% agree with me down the line and you never say anything that is hard for me to hear or that I don't agree with 100%. Like then we're losing allies and we can't afford, we don't have enough in the reservoir. Like we need to find ways to work with one another across lines of difference, not with immoral people or organizations, but it cannot be, I don't know that this is true or not, but my belief is that some people sat this election out because they didn't have anybody who checked every box that they needed them to check. Well, we're all just humans. Nobody can do that for another person. And I feel like spiritually speaking, to put it in spiritual language, right, which is not about conquering, right, but about being with one another in relationships so that we can understand where our needs and desires align to then move forward together, is language that we can reintroduce even in secular spaces that can inspire people to shift and change and not just keep doing what they've been doing before.
You all, can we give a hand clap to our bishop? We're adopting bishop and our presenters. We're just gonna go on just a few more minutes and just try to get a couple of questions from the audience and from online. I'm gonna sort of kick us off and get wrapping this question that's coming in from online. Those of you who are in the room, if Dean Julie is gonna come to you if you have a question in the room. And it would be remiss me as an organizer if I didn't ask this question. I mean, ultimately for us, it's about strategy and tactics, right? That's where our minds go. That's what we're thinking. And so someone, Stephanie Scott Huffman in the chat says, can someone speak a little bit more to the importance of organizing in our churches? I feel like there's a strong disconnect between church and community organizing. What might church look like if more pastors and lay folks took community organizing training? Of course, I would pick this question, but anyway. I don't know, Bishop, if you wanna hit that, or David.
Go ahead, please.
Well,
And if
one
you have a question-
way we might think about it is reimagining our definition of church. That is to say, one of the things that I like that the Catholic Church does is there is the church, the building, but the neighborhood is the parish. And they seek to minister to the neighborhood, or the parish is what they consider as their, catchment area, if you will. And I wonder if we could reimagine our definition of who our congregation is, to not be so narrowly defined as those who raise their hand and become members, as much as it is the community that surrounds the place that we worship. What if all of those people were part of our congregation and we had a responsibility for ensuring that their needs are met in whatever way, through governmental processes, through, social services? What if we expanded our mandate so that we organize for the community surrounding us, as well as we organize the Sunday dinner for the people who come in our doors? I think we've so narrowly defined church and what church is. Only the people that come inside the building are church, or who get on our Sunday Zooms are church. And that necessarily limits then how we think about organizing and how we think about collaboration and how we think about allyship, because it's us four and no more. Everybody who walked in is it. So I would start with, let's redefine who we're talking about. Let's redefine how we think about church and who church is.
So two quick things. I think that a lot of us are going to be very, very gun shy to talk about anything controversial. And I think it's a tragic mistake in congregations that either at least can't, talk about what the disagreement is, are going to die. But most of us have the ability to move something in the way that you were talking about. What is it that we actually are drawn together on? I think congregations that have some sort of clear identity and focus into the community, and certainly it can happen through organizing. There's a life for the whole congregation. It's a way of not only expressing why we are called, but that call grows when it's activated. So just what you were saying, Bishop, made me remember about a year ago, there's a group of congregations I was working with, and they wanted to talk to people in the community. And they were so focused on finding out what the needs of the community were so that we could figure out how we meet those needs. It's not an awful question, but it took a while to sort of open up the possibility that maybe there are assets in the community, and maybe there were things in the community that the church needed, or there were things that we could do together, or there were things that we could address together. And that was a much more life-giving, I think, approach of addressing the parish and becoming part of the parish rather than a benefactor of the parish or a leech off of the parish. And so.
Thank you. Are there any questions in the room? And it doesn't look like it. If there are, go ahead and stand. I'm going to put this one in the room, and then we'll take one more question. Is there one back there? Okay, just there we go. And then we'll go to this one.
My name is Reverend George Miller. I just started at St. Lucas UCC 3 months ago. It is an honor to be here. I do want to be honest and say I'm having a multitude of different reactions because, as some of you know, for the past 14 years, I've been an openly gay man pastoring a church in central rural Florida, in which it used to be one of those sundown towns, in which even when I lived there, there was still a siren that went off at 9 o'clock that meant the Black people had to go to the other side of town. So I have spent 14 years navigating how to be openly me, but fully aware of the reality of what was taking place and the possibility of danger at any moment. And most of my friends were Black or Hispanic or Caribbean, and we were always aware whenever we were together that in many ways we were being radical simply by being. The one thing I'm thinking of, and I had to talk to my friends in Florida about this, is apologizing. That for my own safety, I may have to be a bit of a chicken George. And I don't want to. But at the same time, I've survived by embracing the spirit of Shifra and Pua. I have survived by being the trickster who has learned how to navigate and befriend and be in those dangerous places as fully me, but also kind of being subversive without people knowing that they're subversive. And I don't know if other people in this room have had to develop those techniques. And I don't know if this is the space or time to lift up what does it mean to be a trickster or Shifra or Pua or subversive, or what does it mean if there are moments where you may have to be a chicken George to survive because we really don't know what is happening next. And I'm literally all by myself. And so there's a lot to lose at this moment. Thank you for allowing this space and this time, and for me to feel safe enough to ask a question like this.
I don't know if anybody wants to respond.
Can I just say, In my faith tradition, we would never call Shifra and Pua tricksters. We would call, they're the heroines of the story, mostly unnamed. And without them, there's no Moses. So there's no freedom. So they're super important, like they're linchpin important. And I would say not every person can be everything in every moment. And to the best of your ability to love who you are, where you are, and to be doing what you can be doing safely, most important, safely in the moment in which you find yourself is honorable and important and contributing. And I mean, that's part of the democracy too. Yes, Bishop, like there's not one single person that can save it. Everybody has to play a part, and I would work hard on honoring myself, and being brave like you were right now. And I don't know you, but I think you're also not as alone as it feels, though I understand what you are saying, and I honor that as well.
Thank you.
I would simply offer that in the history of African Americans in this country, we have survived. And many times it's the only way we have survived, through code switching, through all of the things, the words and the names that you gave it, with grown men acting like children or casting their eyes down, with women being who they were not or who they were thought. We had to survive, and that was the point, to survive. And we do it to today, because the society is not one who allows us to be, or who can accept all of who we are in the richness and the fullness and the glory of our loudness and our quietness and our hardness and our softness, because they've created stereotypes for us about what Black women, which is the experience I can speak to, what Black women should be, should do, should sound like, should look like, should behave like. And depending on the room you're in, you switch up, because you got to keep the job, because you need the promotion. And so maybe you wearing an uncomfortable suit, or your earrings are smaller, or your hair is in a certain way, because, you know, in some cities, some states in this nation, wearing your hair natural can get you fired. Yep. So we do it. So my brother, welcome. You're in league with a lot of us who have to do this every day for our survival. And the point, my brother, is to stay breathing. To stay breathing, so that those who come behind you have an example.
Gotta live to fight another day, and fight we must. Bishop, I'm going to give you the benediction, and can we thank this panel and the bishop again for this amazing lecture and responses. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Reverend David. So grateful to all of you. Bishop, will you give us the benediction?
Absolutely. Loving and gracious God, we are grateful to you for this moment, for this time that we have had to share with one another, to listen deeply, to learn deeply, to hear deeply. We thank you, God. We thank you for all that you have done in our lives, in our midst, in our communities, and those who surround us. We thank you for what you've done. We thank you for what you're doing even right now. In the midst of the pain, in the midst of the confusion, in the midst of the hurt, in the midst of the grief, in the midst of the anger, we thank you for how you are working even right now. And God, we thank you for what you're going to do, for the victory we know you're going to bring, for the communities we know you're going to send to us, for the hearts that you're going to place in our midst, for the work that you're going to give our hands to do that will point us to you. We thank you for what you've done. We thank you for what you're doing, and we thank you for what we yet expect you to do. You are a strong and mighty God, and we stand in your presence always as your loving children, as the children that you love, asking you to lead us, to guide us, to direct us, to give us perfect clarity, perfect vision, perfect wisdom for the work that is surely ahead of us. Bless the work of our hands, bless our minds, bless our hearts, bless our spirits. Take us from this place, never from your presence, and bring us back when you are ready, when we are ready, and at the appointed time. We thank you in your loving name, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen. God bless and good night, everyone. Thank
God
you.
bless you.